One of the churches that I go to sings the Mass parts in Latin while playing them on electric bass guitar. Hello everybody and welcome to the Redneck Catholic. Today I'm going to be talking about a divide in the conservative, faithful portion of the Catholic Church that I think is sometimes not very well understood. And so anyway, I'm going to try to identify the two groups within it and discuss some of the differences between the two. Of course, there's similarities as well, and then what I think about each of these issues. Before I get started, though, please like this video and subscribe to my channel as it helps me to grow and reach more people. To begin with, let's define these two sides. One is what I'm going to call the Traditionalist Catholic movement. So if you're a Traditionalist Catholic, you could define that term many different ways, honestly, but the way I'm defining it for this video means you meet two principles. The first is that you either attend or prefer a traditional Latin Mass or a Novus Ordo with more traditional tendencies, right? Like what some people will call a reverent Novus Ordo. Organ, Gregorian chant, all that sort of thing, as much Latin as you can get. That's going to be, you have more traditional liturgical tastes. Then for the second principle, it means that you see the church as in a kind of liberal state. You see the world as in a very liberal state. And you see yourself as kind of a corrective force, kind of bringing the church back to its historical roots and correcting for a lot of the liberalism that was, most rampant in like the 70s and 80s, but remains a problem for the church today. Now, the next group I'm just going to call conservative Catholics because they're kind of a broad group. It's hard to call them anything specific. Now, usually if I use the term conservative Catholics, that would include traditionalist Catholics in there. But for this context, I mean non-traditionalist conservative Catholics. These are people who basically they live in areas where liberalism is not as rampant, either in the church or in general society. So they're from rural areas, small towns, even big cities, just in more conservative areas, like someone from Lubbock, Texas, for instance, or maybe like an immigrant community, like a Vietnamese immigrant community or something like that, where they didn't grow up around liberalism in the church, so they don't see liberalism in the church as like the status quo, right? They don't see themselves as a corrective force. They see things in the church as pretty good because they don't see the church as very liberal. Needless to say, these two groups both agree that liberalism is bad, and they both support church teaching on all issues, abortion, gay marriage, anything like that. They're on the same page. The difference is just that the traditionalists have a more reformist streak to them, a more reformist attitude where they see a lot of the hierarchy as being compromised, whereas the non-traditionalist conservatives do not have a very reformist approach because they see things as not that bad in the church. Now, before I start getting into their specifics, I want to say a couple words about their general attitudes, what I think about the difference between their general attitudes. I don't think that one is right or the other is wrong on this. I think both are formed in response to their areas and their experiences. So like if you grow up going to church in Mississippi, you're not dealing with a bunch of liberals in the church, right? So you see the church as being pretty good, pretty conservative. If you grow up going to church in Philadelphia, then you probably know a lot of liberals in the church, right? It's like the difference, like where I go to church, a lot of families, everyone's pretty faithful, everyone's pretty conservative. Most people go to church every Sunday, it's pretty good. But someone who goes to church in Boston, where it's all a bunch of like hippie boomers who don't even really believe anything the church teaches, they're just here for community or whatever. If that's the church you're going to have a very reformist attitude. You're going to be like, things need to change here. So I think these different attitudes are just shaped by the areas that you're from and what the situation is in those areas. I don't think that one's like right or wrong on a broader level. But let's talk about some more specific issues. First, I wanted to talk about traditional Latin Mass. So for traditionalist Catholics, traditional Latin Mass is very important. It is seen as the ideal form of worship for the Latin Rite, and if not that, at least a guide to correcting many of the liturgical abuses that have occurred in the post-Vatican II Church. And so they look to the traditional Latin Mass as something pure, something very good, whereas they see the Novus Ordo as not necessarily invalid or bad, but something that has a lot of kinks that need to be worked out, with the traditional Latin Mass being the purer and better liturgy. Now, that's not necessarily the view of all traditionalist Catholics, because like I said, many traditionalist Catholics prefer a reverent Novus Ordo, but even for them, traditional Latin Mass remains a very important issue. And so it's preserving it and protecting it is a very top priority for traditionalist Catholics in the 21st century. Before I go and explain the conservative, non-traditionalist view on this, I think it's important to understand that from a traditionalist perspective, if you're going to understand conservative, non-traditionalist Catholics, do not assume that the reason that we don't do something the same way you do something is because we're liberals, okay? Or because we don't like tradition, or things like that. Typically, there's another reason why we do something differently. So go in with that mindset that we're not doing it to be liberals or modernists or whatever you think the reason is, and try to understand why we're actually doing it. So pretty much nowhere is that principle going to apply more clearly than it is going to apply to conservative non-traditionalist views on traditional Latin Mass, okay? So for conservative Catholics, they do not have anything against tradition, and they're not even opposed to the traditional Latin Mass. In fact, I would say most conservative Catholics are supportive of the traditional Latin Mass and want it to be allowed and want it to be relatively unrestricted, so that traditionalist Catholics and non-traditionalist Catholics who just want to experience traditional Latin Mass are able to do so with as much ease as possible. The difference between conservatives and traditionalists on this issue is that conservatives do not typically attend traditional Latin Masses, and they are not nearly as vocal for their support of traditional Latin Mass as are traditionalist Catholics. Now, again, remember the reason why here is not that we're liberals or that we hate tradition. I say we because my views are pretty much the exact same as conservative non-traditionalist views on this issue. So that's why I use the term we. But remember that a large portion of conservative non-traditionalist Catholics are rural Catholics, and small town Catholics. So in these areas, just lower population areas, there are fewer churches, number one. And many lower population areas are on top of that not very Catholic. They're more Protestant, like the South, which is predominantly Baptist. So you have very few people to begin with that could come to your church. And then on top of that, you have very few of those very few people who are Catholic and could come to your church. Thus, there aren't that many churches, and conservative Catholics in rural and small town areas basically do not grow up with a whole lot of options, right? They have maybe 2 or 3 churches that they could attend. And those are pretty much all going to be standard issue Novus Ordo Masses. It is not like in a large city where you could choose between a Novus Ordo, or really several different types of Novus Ordo, several different types of traditional Latin Mass, right? Diocesan, FSSP, all that stuff. An Anglican Ordinariate, an Eastern Rite parish. You might even be able to choose between multiple Eastern Rite parishes. You don't have those options in rural Texas or rural anywhere else in America. You typically just have a couple of churches, and they're all standard issue Novus Ordo churches. So that's what conservative Catholics grow up going to. It's what we know. It's it's typically our preferred form of liturgy, just not because we think it's better than traditional Latin Mass. It's just because that's what we've always gone to. Now, there are some options for traditional Latin Mass. I wouldn't say that conservative Catholics are completely removed from traditional Latin Mass. There are certainly some options to not go to one every Sunday, but to at least experience one every once in a while. And that would primarily be through rural cities. These are large cities that are not part of any larger metroplex, like the Woodlands, right, is a big city that's part of a much larger metroplex, that is Houston, right? It's surrounded by more urban area. But College Station, even though it's the same size as the Woodlands, right, or of comparable size, is surrounded by rural area. It's surrounded by woods, not more city, right? So that's what I mean when I say a rural city, a city like College Station or Lubbock. That's not part of a bigger city. Those cities will have large churches that will. You're not going to have options, like you're not going to be able to go to a traditional Latin Mass church. There's not going to be a church that's going to offer them every Sunday. But there will be churches that occasionally will offer a traditional Latin Mass, like on a Thursday every couple of months or something like that. And that was my only traditional Latin Mass that I've been to. That was how it was done. And so there are sometimes opportunities for conservative Catholics to learn about traditional Latin Mass, but and to go to one. But they're few and far between. And you don't have anyone who goes there every Sunday or identifies themselves as a traditional Latin Mass Catholic. My views on this issue are that I support traditional Latin Mass. I would prefer that it was not restricted heavily, but at the same time, it's not my fight, right? Because I go to Novus Ordo churches 99% of the time. The next issue I want to talk about is music. So traditionalist Catholics have pretty specific musical tastes. They like traditional Catholic liturgies, Gregorian chant, organs, all that good stuff that the Catholic Church has done for hundreds and hundreds of years. Just conservative Catholics have much broader types of music, sometimes even contemporary styles of music. Now, remember that principle I said. Don't assume that the reason conservative Catholics do something that isn't traditionalist is because they're liberals, because they're not. This is important to remember with music, because you can tell all the members of the praise and worship band at some Catholic church that they're Protestants, or they're trying to make the church more Protestant. But they're just going to laugh at you, right? Because they know that's not true. They agree with the Catholic Church on everything, on the Catholic-Protestant divide. So don't assume that just because someone likes praise and worship, they're Protestant, because that's not what's going on here. There are several actual reasons why conservative Catholics have more contemporary music styles. One of them is, again, going back to that rural, the fact that many of these churches are rural and small town churches. What's the most popular type of music in these areas? Country music. What's the most important instrument to learn to play country music? A guitar. And so what do most people in these areas know how to play? A guitar. You're not going to find, like in your congregation, and remember, these are also small churches, so it's hard enough just to put a choir together. How many people do you think you're going to be able to find in a 400-person church who can play the organ well? No one. You're not going to be able to find anyone, probably, in many conservative rural areas. But there will be 50 people out of 400 who can play the guitar, right? You ask me, I can play the guitar. I can play the guitar very well. I wouldn't know what to do if you handed me an organ. I wouldn't know what to do if you handed me a piano. I mean, handed me figuratively, obviously. You can't hand me a piano or an organ. But I don't know how to play either one of those instruments. But I can play a guitar, like, well, right? I can play a guitar pretty well. I'm not great, but I can play one pretty well. I wrote the channel intro and play, the little jingle I have. I did all the guitar work in my Sunset Boulevard parody. I can play guitar. If tomorrow I was put in front of a church choir and I was told I was leading the music, I'd have a guitar in my hand because that's what I can play. And that's what most people can play in these rural areas. On top of that, you just don't have the resources to be going for a particular type of sound in your choirs. You're just trying to, again, you don't have very many people, don't have many resources to work with, so you're just trying to get a choir that sounds decent, right? If they sound decent, that's enough to keep you happy. You're going to have a heck of a time just trying to put together a decent choir. You're going to have a living nightmare trying to put together a choir that is not only talented and sounds decent, but also can follow a particular sound, has a particular set of musical skills, especially if those musical skills are not basic country musical skills like playing a guitar. Now, again, these people are not opposed to traditional music, and that's why I want to bring up the rural towns again, because in the rural cities they do have churches with very traditional music, and many of these churches, though, because people have broader musical preferences and aren't as strict about what kind of music they like, oftentimes there'll be the same church that will offer very formal and very traditional music, and then at other masses they'll offer very contemporary music. And you might think that it's different people going to these masses, but not always. I've definitely seen people at churches singing Gregorian chant and praise and worship, right? I've seen the same people doing both of those things at one particular church that comes to mind. I've seen the same people at those two different types of masses, appearing to be very into the music there, both times. And that was the same church that sings in Latin accompanied by electric bass guitar. So I think that just kind of shows you that people just like music. They like all forms of music liturgically. And so it's not that they're trying to be like, oh, we hate tradition. We're trying to get away from the tradition. We don't want any of that pre-Vatican II stuff where we just want welcomeness or whatever. It's not that. It's just people like all kinds of liturgical music. What are my opinions on this? I would say that I don't have a problem with any traditional music, even traditional music that comes from Protestants. Okay, like I like Anglican hymns, I like gospel music, all that's good. I like all traditional Catholic music. I like, Gregorian chant and all that good stuff. For more contemporary forms of music, I'm not universally opposed to them. I can even get behind them at times. I just have reservations about them. I think they should be played with certain reservations. So I'll talk about the two types of contemporary music. The first is what I'm going to call boomer hymns. This is like the stuff that the St. Louis Jesuits wrote in like the mid-70s. And he will raise you up on eagle's wings, all that kind of stuff. So I think that there are good boomer hymns. And I think it's been around long enough that a lot of choirs have figured out how to play them in good, reverent ways. And so I'm okay with boomer hymns, don't have objections to them. But I think there can be an extreme where because that musical movement was to kind of like feel welcoming and stuff, there were some people involved, I guess, who were just misguided, and they were like, we're going to try to make things welcoming, and their solution to that was by making music worse, okay? because some of the songs from that era sound about like you're singing the hokey pokey in church. Do the hokey pokey and sit down in your pew. That's what it's all about. I mean, it's almost that bad. So there are plenty of boomer hymns that are not like that I don't have an objection to. But if you're going to do hymns from that era in that style, do the best, most reverent ones and avoid the ones that are just bad, right? And I don't necessarily mean bad as in like the meaning is bad or there's heresies in it or something like that. I just mean like the musical quality is bad. Don't play the bad hymns. Next would be praise and worship, and that's the more modern of the two contemporary types. That one, I think, got started in the 1980s, but nowadays I think it's really taken off more in like the 2000s and 2010s, because now, they've got like radio charts and stuff for praise and worship music. So it's definitely a big thing now. I think there is good praise and worship music and very bad praise and worship music. I think it's a genre that's still earning its wings. I don't think it's quite accomplished that yet. And so there's a lot of stuff to be ironed out in the genre, and thus a lot of the songs are still not that good. There's a lot of bad songs in it. It hasn't come to its fruition yet. And my response to that is like with the baby boomer hymns, play the best praise and worship songs, avoid the very cringy ones, because there are very cringy praise and worship songs. Go with the most reverent, calm ones. I think that if you get into too much of a concert mode, which there is a danger of with praise and worship, then that's not appropriate for Catholic liturgy, because ultimately we believe that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, and so this is truly, to borrow a phrase from the Eastern Catholics, it is truly a divine liturgy, right? We have God, we have the body and blood the bread and wine becoming the body and blood of Christ. This is an ancient ritual. It's like very important, and so drawing attention to that away from that with a loud concert is inappropriate. Not saying that all praise and worship music sounds like a loud concert. In fact, much of it does not. I'm just saying that if you're going to do praise and worship, avoid the loud concert sound and go for a more reverent sound. Next up, I'm going to talk about extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. I did not know that this was an issue until recently, but traditionalist Catholics do not like extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. I just say I learned about this issue primarily through doing research for this episode. Okay, I didn't know exactly what was up here. I knew traditionalists didn't like Eucharistic ministers or extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, but I had no idea why, and I considered myself fully on the conservative, non-traditionalist side of this argument. But I wanted to do some research on the topic to understand what's going on, and that shifted my opinion significantly. But first, I'm going to talk about just the differences between conservative non-traditionalists and traditionalists on extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. Traditionalists are very much not a fan. Conservative non-traditionalists typically, I would say, don't realize that it's an issue. They don't understand what's going on with traditionalist Catholics when they oppose this. They see it as a pretty much normal part of liturgy to have lay ministers of Holy Communion. So my views are somewhat undecided on what exactly my opinion is on this, because I didn't even realize that canon law stipulated, and I don't think most conservative non-traditionalist Catholics do realize this. I don't think most realize that canon law actually states that you should only have lay ministers of communion in extraordinary circumstances, basically to avoid, basically to assist the priest if for some reason he is either unable to distribute communion or for him to do it alone would just take too much time. So for an example, I'm going to use my home parish. At my home parish, we have lay Eucharistic ministers who hand out the blood, the chalice, right? And they do that. But the body is always handed out by either a priest or a deacon, because there's typically one priest and one deacon at Mass. So there's two lines, the deacon will be at one and the priest at the other. And then the lay ministers will go out to the sides with the blood, right? After you receive the body, you go and receive the blood from them. So I'm not sure whether I guess this would probably meet a situation where it would take too long to have just priests and deacons doing it, because you can't, if it was just the priest and the deacon, then you would only have one doing the body and one doing the blood, and that would take very long, very long. So I guess our situation probably meets the standards of canon law. I'm not entirely certain on that, though. I've definitely been to churches where the priest did not hand out communion at all, but it was mostly because the priest was very, very old, and so he, I guess, needed to sit down or something. But I guess for future reference, I'm just going to have to pay more attention to lay Eucharistic ministers now that I know, that I understand the canon law around them and realize that they are indeed supposed to be extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. And so I don't have a very well formulated opinion on what the state of them is at most Catholic churches. One thing I definitely think, though, that a lot of people point out is that they'll be up there wearing, shorts and t-shirts and stuff sometimes, and that's obviously not good. So I think a dress code for Eucharistic ministers or lay Eucharistic ministers is always a good thing. Or vestments, having vestments for them is another good thing. So I get that. I think that it's very understandable to be put off by Eucharistic ministers wearing, casual clothing. Okay, so the last issue that I'm going to talk about is altar girls. Traditionalist Catholics are very opposed to altar girls, think it should be all male altar servers, so all altar boys. And meanwhile, conservative non-traditionalists are a little bit split on this issue, but I would say churches in general allow for both. It's just that in churches that allow for both, you'll have families that only do altar boys, okay? That don't send, you'll have families that don't have any of their daughters be altar girls, and they just have their sons be altar boys. That was my family. Me and my brothers, all altar servers. I guess I'm graduated now, though. I'm not an altar server anymore. But my two younger brothers, altar boys. My little sister was never, and I don't think ever will be, an altar girl. But as an altar server, I served alongside many altar girls from many families in the parish that I knew, and so I definitely have some familiarity with them. I think that as far as my own opinion on the matter, how it goes is I would say there are two sides to the coin. One is on the traditionalist side, the purpose of the altar server is traditionally to introduce young men to the priesthood, right? So that they would be up there on the altar understanding how running a Mass works and being exposed to serving at Mass in the hopes that maybe one day they would have interest in becoming a priest or at least a deacon. Well, I guess in pre-Vatican II, in the pre-Vatican II era, you didn't typically become a deacon unless you would later become a priest. So I guess just the priesthood in particular. And I do think that that's a good argument for an all-male altar server rule, because when you get, so some people will respond by saying, well, maybe it's about introducing boys to the priesthood, but for girls it can just be helping them to have a stronger connection to Mass and just helping them to learn about Mass and stuff and have a greater appreciation for it. And that's true, but when you include people who can't be priests into the conversation, I think it makes the conversation less about priesthood also for those who could be priests. And so I think that it makes altar boys less likely to become priests. And I think that this is demonstrated in the fact that pretty much all seminarians, I don't know if y'all read y'all's diocesan newspapers, but I do. And whenever they ordain a bunch of seminarians, ordain them into priests, every single one of them, always, I've never seen someone who didn't do this, all of them always cite their time as an altar server as something that led them to consider the priesthood. So I think there is a real connection to altar servers and the priesthood, and including people who cannot become priests into the role of altar server can diminish that. That being said, I think traditionalists do seriously misunderstand altar girls, and I do want to say a few things in their defense to give credit where credit is due, because I do know a few altar girls, and I think that traditionalists definitely misunderstand them. A lot of traditionalists see it as like a feminist thing. I know a while ago somebody posted some video where a bunch of girls were dancing around in priest vestments, talking about how, they can be or they wish they could be priests or whatever. And that's not what this is. That's not what altar girls are. Altar girls, by and large, are faithful to Catholic teaching. They're not trying to start like a female priesthood or something like that. They support church teaching on, a male-only priesthood. Abortion, they support the church teaching on that, on gay marriage, on birth control, anything like that. These aren't like liberals, okay? Altar girls are not liberals. They are faithful Catholics. At least out of all the ones I've met, right? I haven't met any that were liberals. The reason I bring this up is so traditionalists will understand that altar girls are not your enemy, like Father James Martin or something, right? These are not liberals trying to undermine the church, okay? These are young girls and young ladies who are happy to be serving the Lord at the altar, right? They are not, there's no liberal agenda here. And most are very conservative. And so my advice is whenever you're engaging an altar girl and trying to, or parents of an altar girl or whatever, because, an altar girl could be 18 or 8, right? So sometimes confronting an altar, or if you're opposed to altar girls, arguing with an altar girl about it's not going to get you very far. But her or her parents, and you're trying to convince them that, it should be all male altar servers or whatever, understand that you're not going to be dealing with raging commies, right? That's not what that is. We're not talking about feminists or liberals or anything like that. Treat them with the charity that you would treat any faithful Catholic, understanding that they are doing what they are doing in good faith. As for my own opinions on whether or not I support altar girls, I would put myself as something of a condition. I would say I am conditionally sympathetic to all male altar server movements, because my family is all male altar server, serving in a church that is both male and female, and I do respect altar girls that I know. So I support all male altar servers, but I support it very cautiously, right? And only with extreme nuance, right? And very, very cautiously do I support that, and with appreciation to all the altar girls who are doing a good job and not trying to be feminists. So those are the 4 issues that I think help demonstrate the difference between conservative Catholics and traditionalist Catholics. That's all I got for today, though, so like always, I'm going to end this video with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, thank you for the gift of your church, and thank you for all those in it who truly wish to grow closer to you and to follow your will for us. Help all of those who are truly faithful Catholics extend the utmost charity towards each other, and never view ourselves as servants of the enemy as we do for those who spread evil. Help us to always recognize and see you in each other as well as everyone else, and help us to truly grow closer to you together as a church. We ask this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.